We're beginning to see a number of really successful Chinese companies, particularly in the internet space, that are racing ahead of the rest of the world. And I think this is causing tremendous unease and anxiety in Washington.
If you had to name the biggest breakup in recent history, which would it be? Sonny and Cher? Brangelina? Bill and Hillary? I think they're actually still together, but you know what I mean. Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today I'll explain why the decoupling I'm talking about is not only bigger than any star-studded tryst, it's also the product of a long-distance relationship gone wrong. Don't they always? He's in Washington, she's in Beijing, and over time, it just became clear they wanted different things. But unlike in pop culture, this granddaddy of breakups involves trade, politics, and technology. It represents the biggest geopolitical shift since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Here to help me lay out the stakes is a woman who says there's no going back.
This is a whole new era.
I'm talking about Samm Sacks, cybersecurity and China digital economy fellow at New America Foundation. And don't worry, I've also got your puppet regime.
Well, we may not all agree on everything, but if there's one thing we do agree on, it's that.
But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on.
Major corporate funding provided by founding sponsor First Republic. At First Republic, our clients come first. Taking the time to listen helps us provide customized banking and wealth management solutions. More on our clients at firstrepublic.com. Additional funding provided by Harold J. Newman and by
I'm going to Zhuhai. There's going to be a convening on cybersecurity and privacy. So I take my phone.
You do?
Because I'm an open book. I have nothing to hide.
Yeah.
If someone wants to find something in my phone, they're going to get it. I'd rather just be transparent.
Samm Sacks, cybersecurity policy fellow at New America. Good to be with you.
Great to be back here, Ian.
So talk to me about the Great Decoupling. You say that to understand it, we have to look back at the last decade to show how these two largest economies in the world have been moving towards this moment.
Right. I mean, go back to the early 2000s. You have the Chinese government putting in place plans to double down on reducing reliance on foreign suppliers, build up domestic industries in these technology sectors. This is what's called industrial policy. It's sort of state blueprints to funnel support to move the economy away from low value-add manufacturing sectors to high tech. This is value-added sources of growth to drive the economy.
Something pretty much every industrial economy wants to do.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's been an abysmal failure for years. China's talked about next generation information technology, IT, about aerospace, all of the list of sectors, and they haven't been able to do it. But in the last few years, we're beginning to see a number of really successful Chinese companies, particularly in the internet space, that are racing ahead of the rest of the world. And I think this is causing tremendous unease and anxiety in Washington.
Now, when we talk about the two decoupling, not just competing, but decoupling, that implies that the Chinese are going to have their companies, their products, their Internet of Things. We're going to have ours. Is that what we're talking about?
That's a piece of it. So one element would be if you are a multinational company, you serve markets around the world. When you show up at an airport, say, and you open up your phone and you want to be able to get text messages, you want to be able to use your credit card when you show up around the world, it's this understanding that the systems are interoperable. You can use them seamlessly. So if we move down this path of separate systems, it's possible that you might have products and services that simply don't work in markets around the world. And what does that do? I mean, it does a number of things. It drags on costs. So the margins for multinational companies, they have to build products and services to comply with all these different standards is one. I think you also have a delay in innovation, right? The idea that researchers and engineers are working on apps, on applications that are built on common infrastructure, this sort of open source common infrastructure, and that's what's really driving advancement. And as soon as you start to pull that apart, you see a lag time in terms of being able to really move forward.
So we understand why that would be problematic for the companies who historically have wanted to have access to every market and every scientist and every advance. How is it going to affect the experience of a typical consumer, either in the United States or in China? What will they feel that's different?
Well, things might get more expensive, but I think there's also a component of safety, right? I think about these are technologies that are going to fundamentally alter human society. And we don't have rules of the road yet when it comes to safety and ethics for how these technologies are going to be deployed. And I think if you have the best companies, the best researchers around the world not able to talk to each other and communicate about that, that becomes actually kind of dangerous. So that's, it doesn't mean you show up at Walmart or Best Buy and have trouble finding the right product. It's more of an existential thing. What is it going to mean when computers are woven seamlessly through our lives and we don't have rules of the road? We don't have the best minds around the world talking to each other about how to do that. That's where I worry about my children.
Well, we also, right now, one of the interesting things, time zones, of course, are different, and different people are awake at different times. So Americans and Europeans don't necessarily talk seamlessly, but there's a period of time. If you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, there's a period of time where, you're actually getting news from those people, their photographs from those people. You're sharing with them if you want to follow them. Is that going to not happen between, say, Americans and Chinese in 5 and 10 years' time, in your view?
Let's distinguish between the underlying internet infrastructure and the applications that run on top of it. I think when it comes to the applications, yes, we're going to start seeing, for example, some users are going to be using the Chinese ride-sharing service Didi. Some are going to be using Uber. But I don't see the underlying internet infrastructure, the basic things that allow you to send an email or to be able to, use the Chinese users use virtual service providers, VPNs, in order to break outside of the Great Firewall that censors content. I don't necessarily see that type of infrastructure going away. If we got into a time where, say, the domain name system of the internet, the thing that when you type in the email, the internet address that then gets you to the website, when you're in China, when you're in other parts of the world, that still works. So if we got into a situation where the actual underlying infrastructure of the internet was different around the world, that's where you get into a true fragmented, so-called splintered internet.
So do you think that between the United States and China, the world's two largest economies, is this decoupling now past the point of no return? Is it inevitable?
I think it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy. It didn't have to be inevitable, but now at this point, the rhetoric on both sides is dialed up. I think nationalism in China, techno-nationalism, this idea that technology is a tool of the state, is more deeply ingrained now than it was, say, 2 years ago. There's no going back. It's just a question of, where are we going to draw the lines from here? What's the degree that we will decouple? Will there still be areas of overlap? How far and how fast is this going to go?
Now, as we talk about the inevitability of this decoupling, does that mean that we as Americans are going to be rooting for the Chinese system, its technological system, to fail?
There are certainly some people here that are. And this is where we get into the politics internal to this push from the Trump administration, right? I think there are some, like the Steve Bannons of the world, the Navarros of the world, that would like China to fail. What's their end game? I would say it's regime change. I say they want Xi Jinping out. And as Bannon said recently at a meeting that I was at with him, it's not going to be pretty, but we'll figure it out.
But take a step back from there. I'm saying leave aside regime change. Let's talk just about the fact that if we have two competing systems, they're not interlinked anymore between the US and China, and you think that that train has left the station. So the average American, should we be rooting for the American system to defeat, in a sense, the Chinese technological system?
No, this is really dangerous. We should be rooting for the US to maintain its leadership, its competitive edge. But Does that mean rooting for the Chinese system to fail? That's what I'm saying no to.
The Chinese technological system.
The Chinese technological system to fail.
Not.
No, healthy competition is good for everybody, right? If we're playing defense and we're just trying to win based on fear, I think that hurts us.
Despite the fact that there is now this big phase one trade deal between the United States and China.
The deal includes a Chinese purchase of American goods and services across the board.
And so in principle, Trump is saying Xi Jinping got the deal done. Why are we not more sanguine about the trajectory of the relations between these two countries?
The phase one trade deal, whatever it is kind of like a Band-Aid. It doesn't address what I think are going to be deeper areas of conflict focused on technology, that no matter what happens with this phase one, this phase two deal, are going to continue to bubble up. The CFO of Huawei, Meng Wanzhou, is sitting under house arrest in Canada. Her extradition hearing is set to begin in January. What the heck is going to happen with her? If she is extradited to the US, it is massively escalatory from Beijing's perspective. But if she is released, the China hawks in Washington are going to be livid and there's going to be backlash. So she's a ticking time bomb.
Let's explain what exactly the claim is that she has done. Why is she presently sitting under house arrest?
So we've been talking about cybersecurity issues and technologies. The reason she's under house arrest actually has very little to do with that. She's under house arrest because of violating sanctions relating to Iran. There's a whole litany of complaints that the US government has with Huawei. And so sanctions with Iran is one of them, and that's what's landed her in her current predicament.
Now, I mean, the interesting thing is President Trump himself on human rights issues, right, on, say, Hong Kong, on Xinjiang, someone you don't see a lot of toughness from.
So this is what's baffled me for months. There have been reports coming out that over 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities are under detention in Xinjiang. Mass incarceration, right? Using technology like AI, like big data, like tracking apps, specifically to do so. We've known this for months. Vice President Pence multiple times was supposed to give a speech at the Hudson Institute in Washington criticizing China for this and other human rights abuses, and he kept canceling the speech because trade talks, this was seen as derailing trade talks. They finally did it. They came out and they put a number of Chinese companies on the entity list, specifically designed to punish them for enabling detention in Xinjiang.
These were companies that were providing the tools to allow surveillance, and you can't do business with them anymore.
Exactly. These are like facial recognition, AI companies. And so the Trump administration came out and said, we are the first administration to take China to task on Xinjiang and other issues like this. It's true, and I applaud them for taking action. But the timing is weird because they did it at a key moment as trade talks were going on, which either meant, one, they were trying to use it as leverage in a trade deal. Now, why would you use human rights as leverage in a trade deal? Although I'm positive that's not the first time that's been done, right? The other school of thought is that the decouplers, the real hawks in the administration,
wanted the deal to die.
Wanted the deal to die.
But it didn't work.
Didn't work.
Didn't work because Trump wants a deal.
Right.
But the decouplers still have influence.
Huge influence.
So that's where we seem to be going. Okay, now if you're not the United States and China, let's imagine you're in another country and you're watching all of this go on. You're sitting there in Europe. You're sitting there in Asia. You may be an ally of the United States, but China is increasingly your dominant trade partner. How do you respond to pressure from both the United States and from China that, no, you listen to me?
So let's look at Germany for a moment. They came out recently, earlier this fall, and they said, we're not going to ban Huawei from our 5G supplying network. We're going to evaluate everybody the same, which means we're not going to target a company because it's Chinese. We're going to evaluate all the vendors based on the same technical cybersecurity criteria. And I was in Europe at the time, and one of the rumors that was percolating was Merkel is still furious about the fact that the US government was listening in on her phone calls, as was revealed in the Snowden revelations. And this is sort of saying, look, you have Chinese surveillance, you have US surveillance. Given the tight economic interdependence with China that Germany has, why would we shoot ourselves in the foot? So in that measure where they came out and said, we're going to evaluate everyone the same, they also put language in there that would give them a cover if they wanted to ban Huawei. Here's what they said. They said, as part of evaluating these vendors, we're also going to look at the political system of the country that those companies come from and see if that vendor, meaning Huawei, might be subject to undue political influence. So what that does is in one document, it kind of leaves them room to go either way.
Right. So the Germans haven't made a decision yet.
Right.
They're under pressure from everyone.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are a lot of other countries. Let's face it, if that's Germany, that's a big economy with more influence and with the focus on national security and rule of law. You have to think that there are that weaker European economies that need the money more are going to be tilting more towards Beijing. Am I wrong about that?
Totally.
That is what they do.
I think we're going to see a spectrum of responses. I think you're going to have some which are going to do the UK approach. So what the UK has done is they've had Huawei in the network for like 15 years. And they have a system where they keep Huawei equipment out of what's called the core, the critical part of the network. But they allow it, say, in the part of the network that if there were a problem, maybe you couldn't watch your sports channel on TV. And then they have a center that evaluates everything that comes on. It's called the Huawei Cybersecurity Evaluation Center. So the idea is monitor everything that comes on the network, keep it out of the really critical stuff. And so some countries are probably going to take that kind of middle approach. Other countries are probably going to just ignore the risk altogether.
Is this one where if you can't get a little bit pregnant, once you're actually working with Huawei, you're working with Huawei. Once they're in your system, they're in your system. What do you think?
This gets into a pretty technical debate, which is in an era of 5G, where you're going to have more and more devices connected to the internet. Is it even?
It's everything.
It's everything.
It's your clothing. It's your refrigerator. It's not just your smartphone.
It's not just, so the idea that you can distinguish between the critical core and a device that's connected on the edge that you would think of as just your clothing, just a device. The idea is in this 5G computer era, will you even be able to draw that distinction? And I've heard technical experts argue both sides. So here's what I think this all comes down to. I think that if you see Huawei as a risk, it's kind of like a Rorschach test. And the Rorschach test being, how do you see the Chinese government? If you see the Chinese Communist Party as a threat, then you're going to see Huawei, no matter where it is in your network, as a problem.
So after Huawei, the next company that we're talking about, Chinese company that is, getting targeted, is TikTok. Everybody uses TikTok. What's the problem?
So TikTok's parent company is ByteDance. It's a Chinese company. There are two main risks that US lawmakers are worried about. One is content. Is the Chinese government censoring the content that viewers around the world are consuming with TikTok?
This girl with the makeup and then
talking about Xinjiang with her eyelashes.
And they shut it down.
The first thing you need to do is grab your lash curler, curl your lashes, obviously. Then you're going to put them down and use your phone that you're using right now to search up what's happening in China, how they're getting concentration camps, throwing innocent Muslims in there, separating their families from each other, kidnapping them, murdering them, raping them.
Now the US government is concerned about content censorship, and they're beginning to block global transactions based on censorship issues. This is a whole new era. The second issue with TikTok is the data. So if TikTok collects data on somebody here in the US, is that then going back to the Chinese government? Are they using that to get better at being able to predict what an American would want to buy, what their preferences are, and then could they use that to manipulate people?
One would hope so, right? I mean, that's the whole point, isn't it?
But
we want the Americans to be able to do that.
We want the Americans to do that, too.
That's good. Samm Sacks, good to be with you.
Thanks.
Dependability.
Decades of experience.
Sensible sweaters.
And very selective hearing.
What?
Well, we may not all agree on everything, but if there's one thing we do agree on, it's that
Your next president should be very, very old. Because we support American workers, particularly those who serve soup between the hours of 4:30 and 5:30 p.m.
Because we'll fill the White House with wisdom and dusted bowls of hard candies.
And if you think the Lincoln bedroom's gonna have a moth problem, you are not correct. Mexico will pay for the balls. When that call comes at 3 a.m., we'll know how to use a landline. No malarkey.
Wait a minute. Huh? Who's that rapscallion over there?
It's Alfred E. Newman.
Mayor Pete, that punk is gonna steal my ideas.
No, He's gonna steal our voters!
Get off of our lawn, you punk! Get off of it now!
That's our show this week. We'll be back next week because this is a weekly show, so you can see us every week. It's like clockwork. It's extraordinary. And if you like it, also check us out at GZEROmedia.com.